Paris is like a femme fatale. Hot yesterday, cold today. Hot and cold. I'm beginning to get trauma bonded. Today we are going to discuss remorse, guilt, and shame, and how they can bring about your abuse. Yes, you heard me correctly. Shame, remorse, and guilt of your abuser can lead to your abuse. My name is Sam Vaknin. I'm the author of Malignant Self-Love, Narcissism Revisited. I'm also a shameless professor of psychology. Okay, everyone and his dog will tell you that narcissists and psychopaths possess no remorse, no sense of guilt. Now, the consensus is that narcissists do experience shame. There is a reservoir, a repository of shame within the narcissist that the narcissist spends a lifetime trying to avoid, shield himself from, firewall, and isolate. But the shame is there, and when the narcissist experiences narcissistic injury or narcissistic mortification, the narcissist gets in touch with this shame, and it can become life-threatening. So shame is an important affect, an important emotion in pathological narcissism. However, exactly like the psychopath, the narcissist very rarely experiences guilt and never ever remorse. He is never remorseful. In borderline personality disorder and in secondary psychopathy, and to a large extent in histrionic personality disorder, there is a sense of shame. There are feelings of guilt in the wake of misbehavior, acting out, or other forms of misconduct. There is remorse. Borderlines experience shame, guilt, and remorse. So do secondary psychopaths, and so do histrionics. But in narcissistic personality disorder, especially the pernicious variant known as malignant narcissism, and in antisocial personality disorder, and in primary psychopathy, there is no trace or hint or shadow or I don't know what of guilt and remorse. There are defenses in place which render the psychopath and the narcissist impervious to a sense of guilt or remorse. There is a lot of reframing taking place, justifying their actions. They are never wrong. Whatever they do, they had good cause and reason to do, and they create narratives on the fly which validate their choices and decisions, render them ineluctable, inevitable, and therefore they did what they had to do. Very often they elevate, narcissists and psychopaths elevate themselves, extol themselves, praise themselves, and even brag about egregious misbehavior and sometimes criminal conduct. The difference between narcissists and psychopaths: narcissists are capable of shame, psychopaths are not. But one thing that we all neglected to mention, even in scholarly literature, is that shame, guilt, and remorse can lead to abusive behaviors. Shame, guilt, and remorse are sometimes drivers and engines of abuse. They fuel the abuse. They bring it on. Now, this sounds completely counterintuitive, not to say inane or insane. How could shame, guilt, and remorse result in abusive behaviors? They're inhibitory. These are inhibitory affects. These are affects that inhibit action. So someone who feels ashamed, someone who feels guilty, someone who feels remorseful ceases to act in a way that triggers and generates additional shame, guilt, and remorse. Shame, guilt, and remorse act as brakes in the car of misconduct. They stop the behavior. They inhibit it. They are not disinhibitory, and they're not motivational or attitudinal when it comes to abuse. In other words, Shame, guilt, and remorse do not foster attitudes which lead to abuse and do not motivate people to abuse other people. On the very contrary, shame, guilt, and remorse are, of course, to a large extent, social constructs. They are the outcomes of processes such as socialization and acculturation. And the edicts of society, the conventions, the mores, the norms of society are communicated via socialization agents like the parents. We tend to internalize these messages. They become part of us. And this is what is known as conscience. Conscience is an internal object, the container of all these instructions on how to not behave. And so people who experience shame, guilt, and remorse are very likely to cease and desist, to completely stop their abusive behaviors. Why am I saying that sometimes shame, guilt, and remorse lead to abuse? Because it depends who is experiencing the shame, guilt, or remorse. Someone who has very high narcissistic defenses, someone who is a bit antisocial, psychopathic, for example, people with dark personalities, dark triad and dark tetrad personalities, they are not narcissists, they are not psychopaths, but they are subclinical, they're almost there. People with narcissistic personality style or psychopathic personality style, people with borderline personality disorder to a large degree, these people, when they experience shame, guilt, and remorse, it triggers them. They become aggressive. They act out. And I would like today to isolate 3 mechanisms out of many, which mediate the transition between shame, guilt, and remorse, these negative effects, and abusive behavior, which is disinhibitory and constitutes externalized aggression. Okay, so the first mechanism is alloplastic defenses. When someone with a dark personality, let alone someone with a cluster B personality disorder, when they experience shame, for example, in the case of the narcissist, or guilt and remorse in the case of the borderline, they tend to become angry. And they're angry at the source of the ego-dystony. They're angry at the person who made them feel guilty. They're angry at the victim of abuse because it caused the abuser to feel remorseful or regretful. Whenever they experience shame, regret, or remorse, they blame somebody. You made me feel this way. You made me feel guilty. You are guilt-tripping me. You made me feel ashamed. You're humiliating me. You made me feel remorseful, even though I shouldn't be remorseful at all. I acted the only way I could, and I acted for the greater good. So alloplastic defenses kick in. They become very angry, enraged, furious at the source of their discomfort, at the source, at the person who they perceive to have been the cause of the regret, shame, and remorse that they're experiencing. Ego-dystony is this sense of not feeling comfortable in your own skin, knowing that you've done something wrong. When your perception, self-perception, or self-concept, or self-image as a good person is undermined or challenged somehow by another person. Now, the other person doesn't have to be active. The very existence and presence of the other person is sufficient to trigger sometimes guilt and remorse and shame. So it's not like the other person has been abusive or the other person has triggered the narcissist or the borderline, or it's not like the other person has provoked the narcissist or the borderline or the histrionic or the secondary psychopath. It's not like the other person has done something to intentionally, deliberately, premeditatively trigger and provoke and evoke these negative, uncomfortable emotions in the other person. No. The borderline can feel highly uncomfortable having acted out against her intimate partner. And she feels highly uncomfortable, she feels ashamed, she feels guilty, she feels remorseful, not because the other person has done anything, but because of what she has done. But she can't admit it. She can't say, I feel guilty and ashamed and remorseful because of something I've done, because she is grandiose. Borderline personality disorder involves grandiosity. And because she has alloplastic defenses, so she blames the intimate partner. She says, you make me feel ashamed. You shame me. You're humiliating me. You're guilt-tripping me. I'm remorseful and I don't even know for what. Or whatever it is that I've done, my misbehavior, my misconduct, however egregious, my acting out, my externalized aggression, my defiance, my recklessness, you made me do it. You triggered it in me. You triggered these behaviors in me. You provoked me to misbehave. It's your fault altogether, and I'm angry at you. So shame, regret, and remorse in these disordered personalities lead to increased abuse. They become even more abusive, much more aggressive. They externalize the aggression in a desperate attempt to devalue or even eradicate, annihilate the source of these emotions, the reason for these emotions. So if you have an intimate partner, if you're a narcissist, you're a borderline, you're histrionic, you're a secondary psychopath, and you have an intimate partner, and you have betrayed this intimate partner in some way, infidelity or legal financial abuse or whatever. Somehow you betrayed this intimate partner. You would feel regretful, you would feel remorseful, you would feel ashamed, and you would feel guilty. But immediately your defenses would kick in, and you would say, I'm feeling all these things. I'm feeling uncomfortable. I'm ego-dystonic because of my intimate partner. He made me do it. He pushed me to do it. Had he not been in my life, I would have never behaved this way. In his presence, I change. He brings out the worst in me. So there's a shifting of blame, alloplastic defenses, and this leads to abusive behaviors, because if your partner has done this to you, he needs to be punished. He needs to be tortured. He needs to be made aware of his own transgressions. And this leads to abuse. So this is the first mechanism, alloplastic defenses. The second mechanism is affective matching. Affective matching is when we have negative affects, we experience shame and experience guilt and remorse, and we're trying to justify these emotions. We're trying to validate the negative affects by behaving in ways which correspond to these affects, make sense of them, validate them. So it's like saying, that's who I am, and there is nothing I or anyone else can do about it. That's my true nature. I'm going to be loyal to myself. I'm going to be me. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to succumb to someone else's narrative or expectations or conventions or mores or norms. No way. I'm contumacious. I reject authority. I'm defiant. And I'm reckless. That's who I am. I misbehave. I misbehave. Now, I feel guilty. I feel remorseful. I feel ashamed. That's the cost of doing business. That's part and parcel of my existence. The price of being me, the cost of being me, the unintended consequences of being me are these negative effects, are these negative emotions that I cannot help to feel, to experience. I feel ashamed, I feel guilty, I feel remorseful. Now, should I change my behavior? Should I behave differently? No way. That would be betraying myself. That would be denying myself. And I am never going to deny myself. I'm never going to betray myself. It's my way or the highway. It's a take it or leave it situation. And I reject any attempt to change me, to transform me, to make me someone else. So yeah, I accept myself as I am, and I accept the consequences of my actions and choices and decisions, some of these consequences are emotional, and they involve shame, guilt, and remorse, and then I move on, and I do exactly the same thing, because that is my essence, that is my quiddity, this is my authenticity. I'm an authentic person. And the third mechanism is reaction formation. Reaction formation is an attempt to display or exhibit behavior which would negate or contradict parts of oneself that one rejects. So if there's something in you, a trait, a behavior, a belief, a narrative, a value system, something in you that you don't like, that you don't appreciate, that you reject, that you hate about yourself. One way to negate it, one way to eliminate this nagging, extremely upsetting feeling that there's part of me, part of you that you don't like. One way of getting rid of this is by behaving in ways which ostentatiously, publicly, visibly negate and contradict these parts in you that you dislike. So the most famous example, if you have a same-sex attraction, you're latent homosexual, and at the same time you've had a religious upbringing, and you hate the fact that you are attracted to the same sex. So what you would do, you would become homophobic, ostentatiously so. Like, you would be all over the place declaring your homophobia. And by becoming homophobic, you would negate your homosexuality or latent homosexuality, your homosexual tendencies. You would negate them. You'd say, I can't be a homosexual. Look how homophobic I am. So reaction formation also operates when you have affects which are alien to you, when you're estranged from your emotions, when the emotions you experience are so overpowering, overwhelming, so uncomfortable, so negative, so depressing, that you want to get rid of these emotions. Guilt, shame, and remorse are exactly such emotions. That's why we call them ego-dystonic emotions. They're emotions that make you feel uncomfortable, upset. And so one way to get rid of them is reaction formation. Is to say, I feel guilt and shame and remorse. I hate it. I don't want to feel guilt and shame and remorse. So I'm going to make someone else experience shame and guilt and remorse. That's projective identification. And the way to do this, I would devalue them. By abusing them, they should feel ashamed. Having been abused, they should feel ashamed. By attributing to them my own motivations, choices, decisions, and action, the process known as projection, I would then expect them to feel guilty and remorseful. Now, reaction formation is simply, they should be guilty. They should feel guilty. They should feel ashamed. They should feel remorseful, not I. So I don't feel any of this, because they should. It's kind of handing over the baton, transferring the burden, letting someone else cope with these negative emotions because the personality disordered individual cannot cope with them. They are dangerous. They can lead to decompensation and disintegration and even suicidal ideation. So one way to get rid of them is to simply hand them over to someone else and say, from now on, you are the keeper of these emotions. You are the guardian of these emotions. You're the one who is going to experience these emotions. And you're going to experience these emotions because I've created this reactive formation narrative in which you are me. I am not me, but you are me. I am not the part that I hate in myself. I disown the portions of myself that I reject. I hand them over to you and they become you. That's projective identification. They become you. And at that moment, when this transfer of rights, if you wish, is effectuated, it's done visibly and ostentatiously. It becomes ossifies into an ideology. It, in other words, forms the identity of the individual. At that point, it becomes reaction formation. So these are three mechanisms of many where the brief, fleeting experience of guilt, shame, and remorse in certain types of personality disorders actually leads to an exacerbation and worsening of abusive behavior, alloplastic defenses, reaction formation, and affective matching. That's it. Now, if you have suffered through this video, it's your guilt. You should feel ashamed for having listened to the end. And I'm not remorseful at all for inflicting this video on you.